Greetings, everybody. Thank you again for joining us for this month's third Thursday session, third Thursday together. Today we have our special guest, Dr. Maru Gonzalez. She's the Associate Professor and Youth Development Specialist in the Department of Ag and Human Sciences with North Carolina State University. I'm going to pass it off to her so she can give you more background on who she is and how she got started and then she can lead us into our third Thursday session. All right, Dr. Gonzalez.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Erica. Good afternoon, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you all today to talk about something that's really at the core of my work. As Erica mentioned, I'm an associate professor and youth development specialist in the Department of Ag and Human Sciences at NC State. And my work focuses on youth development broadly with an emphasis on storytelling, civic and community engagement, and belonging. So I run an extension program called Pass the Mic Youth, and it really focuses on youth leadership and social impact storytelling and really amplifying young people's voices, giving them opportunities to lead. And so here are just some of the programs that we run. We do summer camps. I also organize an annual TEDx youth event, and young people are assigned coaches, and they put together talks over the course of several months, and they present those talks on a TEDx stage. And we also partner with a local municipality and run a youth advocacy summit every February as well. I also co-authored a book called Teaching Storytelling in Classrooms and Communities. And so, like I said, storytelling is a passion of mine, and I've seen the impact that it has on young people. I've seen the impact that it has on communities and on adults who work with young people. So I'm looking forward to talking about how to integrate storytelling into youth programming. All right, so that was a little bit about me. If you all could in the chat write your name, your role in the 4-H military partnership program, and then we're going to do something called a 6-word memoir. And it's pretty straightforward. It's essentially describing yourself in 6 words. So you can do this a few different ways, right? There are no constraints. You could choose 6 words that best describe yourself. You could also come up with something a little bit more poetic. So I just wrote down a couple of examples. For me, working mom of 3 plus dog, right? That's 6 words. And it says at least some about who I am. And another one, if you wanted to be a little bit more poetic, could be something like found my purpose, now supporting others. So it's really kind of up to you what you come up with. But this is just like a little activity that helps sort of break the ice using more of a storytelling or narrative approach. So it's something that you can also use in your program. So yeah, whenever you're ready, if you all could include that in the chat, your name, your role in the 4-H military program, and a 6-word memoir. Oh, Michelle was quick. So Michelle, 4-H educator and state military liaison for Maryland and proud Air Force mom, times 4. That's amazing. Thank you for sharing.
It's too many words to
It
to
is.
look to
I
say.
know.
Oh,
It
dang.
is. All right. We also have Brenda from the University of Wyoming, Laramie County, and 4-H military educator, 6-word memoir mom, book and animal lover educator. That could have been my 6-word memoir too. I love all of those things. And Katie, regional 4-H specialist in Missouri, 4-H mom to all plus ag. Great. Jennifer, lead child and youth program coordinator, the National Guard, mom, wife, and lover of nature. Wonderful. We also have Ashley from Michigan State University, 4-H program coordinator in Wayne County. 6-word memoir, exploring wildly, empowering youth, loving fur babies. I love that. All right, we'll just wait to see if there are any other. Okay, here we go. Erica, Thomas Pullen, youth development specialist, passionate spouse mom who loves traveling. That also could have been my 6-word memoir. Katie, youth development extension educator, partnering with the 148th Fighter Wing on a military kids club program. 6-word memoir, curiosity-driven mom, educator, and yogi. Awesome. Cool. All right, I think that might be it. Erica, did you? Oh, yeah, Erica, you already went. Perfect. Awesome. So we will move right along. You all did a great job. Okay, so we're going to start by unpacking storytelling just to make sure we're all on the same page about what storytelling means. And then we'll dive into the principles for teaching storytelling, review some activities to awaken the storyteller within, and then I'll provide some tips for scaffolding the story building process. I put Q&A at the end, but I really want this to be kind of more of an informal, dialogic kind of conversation. So if you all have any questions at any point in time, feel free to take yourself off mute or to throw a comment up in the chat, and I'm happy to answer it. I just saw that there was a comment right now, and it is another introduction from Miranda Duval, 4-H agent in Jacksonville, Florida, 6-word memoir, 4-H alum, loves music and books. Amazing. Welcome, Miranda. All right, so for this, we're just going to do like a free association exercise here. So I'm just going to ask you all, when you think of story, what comes to mind? And this can be a word, a phrase, an emotion. It doesn't have to be a definition. And you all can, again, use the chat or take yourself off mute. What comes to mind when you think of story or storytelling? Sharing, yeah. Comfort, someone sharing their experiences, tale of a journey, physical or developmental, learning and experiences, history, absolutely. So stories, a way to escape reality, sometimes comforting, sometimes not, right? So often the stories that we read can be comforting, the stories that are shared and that we listen to can be comforting and sometimes not, right? Um, a way of being seen, absolutely. History, oral stories get passed down through generations, right? Experiences, a lot of the stories that are shared are based on personal experiences. So there's a lot of personal storytelling. What are some other ways that stories are shared? So we're all familiar with like books, with narrative forms of storytelling. What are some other storytelling formats or mediums that come to mind? Film, art. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, art, quilts, yes, that's a creative one for sure. Something that's becoming more common is digital storytelling, right? We see that a lot in things like podcasts, music, photography, right? Um, Even dance. There's a lot of different ways in which stories can be told and shared. So a story is a way, and this is sort of just like a textbook definition. It's a way of sharing an experience, idea, image, or moment so an audience can make meaning from it, right? And that, as we went over already, can look a lot of different ways, right? It can be presented in many different formats. And often when we think of stories, we think of the narrative arc, right? We think of an introduction, rising action, a climax, falling action, and a conclusion. And we think of plot, we think of characters, we think of conflict. And most stories include all of these elements. Um, for my work, when I talk about storytelling, um, often it does include all of these elements, but sometimes storytelling might be, you know, for in, more of an abridged activity. So, for instance, the 6-word memoir that we shared at the beginning, it's a storytelling sort of a narrative activity, but obviously it's not going to follow the narrative arc, but still helps young people sort of get familiarize themselves with story building, storytelling, leaning into their creativity, things like that. And we'll talk a little bit about the narrative arc later. All right, so for this is basically just, as you can see, a statement on the slide. It says, I consider myself a storyteller. And I wasn't sure the best way to do this. We could do it a few different ways. That if you strongly agree with the statement, you could either do the check mark emoji. If you're somewhere in the middle, you do the kind of scared emoji. And if you strongly disagree, you do the X emoji. There's also, if you wanted to use the annotate feature, you could do that. Or you could just do, thumbs up, if you have your camera on, thumbs down if you strongly disagree, and thumb in the middle if you're somewhere in the middle. Does that make sense? Whatever sort of format works best for you. But essentially, the idea here is based on this statement, I consider myself a storyteller. To what extent do you strongly agree, strongly disagree, or are you somewhere in the middle? All right, so I'm seeing a couple of check marks so far. Somewhere in the middle, another check mark in the chat. All right. Okay, so I'm not surprised, right? Because most of you all are educators. So middle to agree. Okay. So those of you who selected strongly agree or somewhere on the spectrum of agree, why did you choose to take that stance? Why do you consider yourself a storyteller?
I get told by my colleagues I have the best stories.
Okay, that's great.
I feel like I have experiences
hmm
that are interesting.
Yeah.
And even from like a very young age, I've
hmm
always been inclined to share with others, and I love sharing with others. Um, and it gives also a creative outlet.
Okay. So you're someone who just is inclined to share and to tell stories and to create stories. Anybody else?
I'm
I think
the go for it, Katie.
I think as an educator, I tend to lean more towards a storytelling approach to education
Okay.
to provide that information with why it's meaningful or how to use it. And that kind of appeals to that style of learner
Right, right,
versus just
absolutely.
providing information. Here you go, take it.
Right, absolutely. So in teaching and education, stories often help make contact or concepts more relatable. Oh, Erica, what were you gonna say?
Oh, in my family, I'm the family historian.
Oh,
So
that's
I've kept a lot of the stories that my grandparents and great grandparents have
Mhm.
shared, and I pass it on. And the family will call and say, "Hey, tell me about what happened way back
Right.
when, whatever." So
That's wonderful. Yeah, I feel like every family should have its own historian. So Brenda shared in the chat, the older I get, the more I find I like to listen to other stories, and then I always think of stories that relate to those. I like to relate to others, and telling stories helps with that. Yeah. Yeah. So it's not just about telling stories, but it's about listening to and taking in other people's stories. What about those of you? No one did a thumbs down, but anybody who was kind of in the middle, maybe unsure? Do you all want to share why you chose that stance? And no pressure. Um, I've done this activity with different audiences, right? People who are practitioners, young people. And often, especially with young people, I get a lot of, "Ooh, I don't know. I don't really think so. Thumbs down." And then I follow up by asking, how many of you have social media accounts and post to your social media? And they all, or the vast majority of their hands go up. And it's like, well, if you're creating content to share on social media, you're effectively telling a story, right? Or if you sit down at a dinner table and share, with your family or a friend, how your day was, you're effectively telling a story. And so we often tend to think of storytelling as something that is for the creatively inclined, for people who are really great at public speaking, when in fact, all of us, in some capacity, are storytellers. And I think once people embrace that and kind of see themselves as storytellers, that kind of starts to shift things. And they're like, okay, well, maybe I do have something to say. And I think for me, anyway, that's really important, particularly when working with youth. Okay. All right. So I just cleared all of your beautiful annotations. And we already alluded to this uh, during our previous conversation, but storytelling is an effective teaching tool. So um, just indicate whether you agree, disagree, or if you're somewhere in the middle. And we talked about this already, but what do you think it is about storytelling that makes it effective as a pedagogical tool?
I think it's the ability to connect.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, stories, there are many reasons stories and storytelling is valuable and effective, but the capacity to connect when listening to someone's story or when sharing a story um, is really significant, especially when listening to a story from someone who maybe has a different life experience, and it may be that we don't understand somebody else's experience because we haven't walked in their shoes, but there's something that's ingrained in all of our stories, right? Which, whether it's grief or loss or joy, excitement, that's just part of the human condition, that even if we don't understand what somebody else's experience is, we can connect on those points that are just universal. And it can also just be an engaging teaching tool as well. In addition to being effective, in addition to helping students better understand concepts and content, it can also just be more fun. In the courses that I teach, I weave storytelling, just into, most assignments that I have. I give them the option of creating a story, even rather than writing a paper, maybe they create a script for a podcast and they still have to do the work in terms of like doing maybe an annotated bibliography, including a reference section, making sure their work is cited, but something about structuring it differently makes it more engaging for students and also makes it more fun for me as the instructor. All right, let me delete these annotations. And we'll move on to the next slide. All right, so there are lots of benefits of youth voice and engagement, including storytelling. We see an increase in self-confidence, academic performing, sense of belonging, and that connection that we were talking about, collaborative skills, a greater sense of agency and self-efficacy. And especially now, I find when AI is on the rise, being able to cultivate human-centered skills like public speaking, like collaboration that AI can't replicate, is becoming all the more important. Storytelling can also inspire connection, as we mentioned earlier, establish mutual understanding across differences, which in turn helps reduce prejudice. It can help us process hardships, nurture self-worth and empowerment, especially as young people, if they listen to another story and they can connect with it, or they see themselves in it, or it's a story of a young person leading and being successful, then they think, I can do that too. I'm a young person and I can be successful. So it can be effective in that way too. It can cultivate awareness about, whether it's somebody sharing a personal experience, or maybe it's awareness about an issue that's happening at school or in the community or in the world. And that in turn can help drive informed individual and collective action. In fact, there's research that suggests that stories are 22 times more memorable than facts or figures alone. And one of the reasons is because, especially when we hear emotional stories, it changes our brain chemistry. Our oxytocin levels increase, and oxytocin is responsible for empathy. And so when we have a greater sense of empathy, we're more likely to change our behavior or to engage in action. So stories are really effective in that way as well. So this is from the book I co-authored with a couple of colleagues, and we identified 6 principles that we felt were important for teaching storytelling. And the first is space matters. So if we're asking young people to share stories, whether it's about, personal stories or stories that focus on issues that are important to them, it's important to foster a space that's supportive, that's welcoming, that's caring, that's respectful, right? That's just the foundation. And then just keeping in mind that the stories we tell matter, especially as I mentioned before, with youth, I do a lot of work on social impact storytelling. So giving young people the tools to tell stories about issues that impact their schools and their communities so that they can advance the common good. And it's important to tell that young people see stories and see themselves represented in stories of other young people successfully leading. And that helps increase their own sense of self-efficacy. And so just being really mindful of the stories that we're telling. Related to this is a focus on ethics. Ethics in storytelling is really important, especially if we're telling stories about communities that we don't belong to. If we're telling somebody else's story, making sure that we have their consent, making sure that we're not presenting them in a way that is one-dimensional or reinforces stereotypes. So there's a lot, to consider when it comes to ethics. And then reflection is an important part of the story building process for both students and educators. It's important for students to think about, okay, well, why is it that I'm choosing to tell this story? And how do my experiences and my knowledge of the world shape how I'm going to tell the story and from which angle, right? Having that reflective process, as with any teaching, right? I mean, reflection is a core part of experiential learning, right? It's a core part of 4-H, and that same structured reflection is necessary to the storytelling process. And then story structure is important. So is creativity. So I talked about the narrative arc at the beginning, and that structure is important, and having a sense of structure is important. But there are all sorts of different ways to tell stories. Sometimes people, like to take a more linear approach and start at the beginning and go to the end. Some people like to start at the end and work their way back. Some formats like visual art leave a lot of things to interpretation. Same with photography. And so leaving that door open to creativity is really important. And then finally is, the recognition that stories aren't the end, they're the starting point, especially when it comes to things like driving social impact. That storytelling can open the door, can be an entry point, can be a launching pad toward greater collaboration and coalition building, et cetera. So I'll give you an example. There was a student who, a couple of years ago, for her TEDx youth talk, she put together a talk on, she's legally blind, and her talk was on creating a more accessible world for visually impaired people. And after she gave that talk, she was so transformed really by how impactful it was. Like it was impactful for her, and it was also impactful to the people in the room. And it also ended up being impactful to the teachers, her teachers, to her administrators, to the students at her school. And she was like, okay, I want to use this to create awareness in my school. I want to, take this story to the school board. I want to talk to my city council about how they can make public spaces more accessible. I want to talk to the school board about how they can make classrooms and the website more accessible for visually impaired students. And so she recognized that like sharing her story was the start of something much bigger. All right, so now I'm going to move toward different activities that you can implement to help awaken the storyteller within. So I said before, a lot of youth don't really see themselves as storytellers. And so doing activities that help them sort of start to exercise their creativity and lean into it is an important step toward having them actually build and share stories. So these are a couple of activities that you can do, even as like introductory activities, like a 30-second story to introduce yourself. And this is essentially what it sounds like. It's 30 seconds to, either come up with a vignette, and it can be sort of, just like a string of facts about yourself, or it can be something a little bit more poetic, or it can be a play-by-play of what you had for breakfast. But it's an opportunity for young people to put something together and to have 30 seconds where, it's just their time and they can share it. And then the haiku U is another activity where essentially they're just putting together a haiku. So that format of 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables, and it's about themselves. So they're like practicing poetry basically, but also introducing themselves. And I find that these are also just fun activities that help, provide an activity that's different from your run-of-the-mill, name, school you go to, and a fun fact about yourself. So I think young people appreciate it as well. So blackout poetry is one of my favorite activities. And the reason it's one of my favorite activities is because you get such a high value, I think, reward, and you don't have to write a word. And so the way that this works, if you're unfamiliar with it, is that you can take a page from a book, from a magazine, and essentially what you ask youth to do is look through, read every word, and in pencil circle words that just resonate with them, that stick out to them. And then, at the end, they might have a bunch of words circled, and they, one by one, just maybe start erasing the ones that they no longer need, and they put together a poem. They can even, and they black out everything else, right? They black out the words that they're not using. They can illustrate, design it in whatever way they want, as they have here. And if you wanted to be a little bit more specific, like say you're, you want them to write a poem that's focused on civic engagement, maybe you use like old speeches, old famous speeches or something like that. So you give them like actual words that they can use that are relevant. So here are just a couple of examples. This one says, a flawless sky, sunk in the sand, a mind clouded with shooting flames. And this one says, he had died but not yet noticed, like a solitary life, a huge dark abyss. This is an example from a student in one of my classes. I teach an honors course at NC State called Storytelling for Social Change. And this student was a business major, had never written poetry in his life. And he took this page out of a woodworking book. And he thought, gosh, what am I going to find, with a woodworking book? And he produced what I think is just a beautiful poem. And it reads, "At home, I have learned of war, men removed of life. Perhaps the souls illustrate the boundary of time, men designed to belong elsewhere." And what I found was after doing this activity, and especially with this student in particular, he was like, wow, like, I can't believe that I created this. And so it just gets their creative juices flowing and gets them interested in things like poetry. So speaking of poetry, this is another example, and we call it "Justice is a Butterfly," and it's essentially like a metaphor poem, but basically you choose a word that maybe it's like a concept related to something that you all have been focusing on in your program, and then you choose a bunch of other words, the random, unrelated words. And the task is essentially to take the one word, say it's a word like youth voice, right? Youth voice, and the other word, maybe it's garden. And so in working in groups, youth would come up with like, a list of words that come up when they think of youth voice, and really to try and spark that vivid imagery is, asking them, what does youth voice sound like? What does it feel like? What does it look like? And the same thing, what does a garden look, feel like? What does it look like? What does it sound like? And then based on what they come up with, they put together these poems. And again, it's a little bit lower stakes because they're working in groups and you're scaffolding the process for them. And then they just come up with such cool stuff. So this was by a group of students. We were studying ethics. So they did "Ethics are a whiteboard." Ethics are a whiteboard, moral principles to guide every action. Defining character and informing decisions varies from person to person, class to class. A whiteboard is impermanent, written and erased as needed, a tool for conveying information, plagued by the residue of past ideations. Both are a blank slate, changed by time and convenience. And what I love about this too is that it helps the youth and whoever's reading the poem understand the concepts more clearly, right? If you can compare ethics to a whiteboard, you really must understand ethics, right? Here's another example, and this one takes a different approach, but it's also just, I think, very good and very creative. So they chose the word community and the word tea. And this is what they came up with. English breakfast wakes you up. Chamomile helps you sleep. Green tea is healthy for your body. Oolong is good for the soul. Earl Grey has bergamot, so good. Ginger with lemon is good for the gut. The blacker the tea, the stronger it is. All the flavors that bring us together. Community, which I loved. Okay, so I know I'm going through these pretty fast. So if anybody has any questions, please feel free to throw something in the chat. So since we're on this poetry, I'm on a little bit of a poetry rant. This is called crowdsourced poetry. And again, low stakes because, a group of people are coming up with this poem. Sometimes it's called community poems as well. And it's basically you give youth like a sentence stem or a few sentence stems, and they each contribute one line, and then you all put it together and come up with one poem. So an example here that I've done is I Dream, and it's based on Langston Hughes's poem, I Dream a World. So you could do like, I dream a school, or I dream a community, or I dream a world, or, however you want to structure this. But the 3 sentence stems I came up with for this specific example is I dream a school, I will build such a school by, and we will build such a school by. And the we was like the final sentence. And so I did this with a group of 4th graders. And this is just part of the poem, and I'll just read a little bit of it. But it's, I dream a school where everyone is nice to everyone, where all are included and fairness counts, a school where everyone shares their differences and religions are respected. I dream a school that cares for each other, where bullying is nowhere to be found, not even a mean kid when you turn around. I dream a community where nobody should starve, not a bit of bread or a cabbage head. We should all have filling meals, day or night, rain or snow. We should all have something to eat. And then you see at the bottom, then it moves to I will contribute. I will contribute to such a world by showing fairness and kindness to everyone and listening to everyone's story and sharing what I believe in by helping and respecting people and acting in ways to build up others. If we all contribute, we can make a change in the world and make it a better place. So yeah, it was cool to do that with fourth graders, and they came up with something that they were all really proud of. And we actually have art and poetry galleries at our TEDx Youth event. And so this was something that we blew up on a big canvas, and we invited students to come in and stand in front of it during intermission if they wanted to. So there are all sorts of things that you can do with that. Okay, so here's just a few tips for scaffolding the process once they, if you're interested in walking youth through like actually building a story to share it. I think one of the most effective things, whether you're just like writing an essay or writing a poem or putting together a story, is to make a list, right? It's just a good way to brainstorm. And so since I focus a lot on social impact stories and telling stories about issues, local issues, school specific issues that young people care about, one of the exercises that I do early on is to ask them to make a list of issues impacting your school and or community that you'd like to address, or maybe ones that you've shown leadership on. So this can be anything from like mental health to environmental sustainability, food waste, youth leadership, fast fashion, school climate. I included deployment separations on there because I know that's big for military families, and public transportation. And then a follow-up could be, okay, well, now that you have that list, put a star next to causes you can tell personal stories about. Put a star next to an issue you're most excited to speak about. Put a star next to an issue that makes sense for you to talk about. Put a star next to issues that feel the most important to talk about right now. And so that helps them kind of put things into perspective a little bit, and helps narrow down like, okay, well, this is something that, maybe I care about, but it's not something I know a lot about, or it's not something that I am personally connected to. So maybe it makes more sense for me to focus on this other thing. And then we talked about the importance of incorporating self-reflection earlier. And so having them think about things like, of all the stories you could tell, why are you focusing on this one? Why do you care about telling this story? When did you begin to care? How have your life experiences shaped how you will tell this story? Like having them reflect on that is an important part of the process. And then this is another fun activity for getting them to like move from idea to somewhat of an outline. And what I like about this is they're using, a format that they're already accustomed to using, that many of them use every day, sometimes multiple times a day. So, step one can be sum up, the message you want to convey about your story in a hashtag or a keyword or phrase. Then some of the message you want to convey about your story in a post, 280 characters or less, or maybe, develop a meme. And then step three, put together a longer social media story and use a video, maybe use a photo, like, put together like a TikTok or an Instagram, or even like a photo blog in the style of Humans of New York. And that can help them build a story, again, using a format that they're already familiar with. And then this is a resource that comes out of the field of science communication, and it's called the message box. And basically the point of this resource, because I know it's a lot and you're probably like, oh my God, I don't even know where to direct my eyes. But it's a way of saying everything that's important should fit it in this box. And if it doesn't fit in this box, then then you need to cut it down, right? Because that's something, that I think all of us have a tendency to do, is to maybe include a lot of fluff. And by doing the message box, it really helps clarify and hone in on your core message, and take out all that stuff that maybe isn't so important. So it has things like, who's your audience, what's the issue, what is the problem? What are the solutions? What are the benefits, right? Why does this matter? The so what? So that's a helpful tool. And I'm going to provide a link with resources at the end. So, because I know I'm going through this quickly. And then another piece that's important, especially when youth are putting together those like more social impact stories, is helping them identify who their audience is, because who their audience is going to determine how they frame their message, right? So if there's a young person who is really passionate about creating awareness about mental health, if they're sharing their story or their message in a room full of people who maybe don't know a lot about mental health, then they're going to spend a lot of time creating awareness, right? About why that issue is important. If they're sharing their message to a room of, mental health advocates and school counselors, then their focus is going to be less on creating awareness because they're preaching to the choir, and more about saying, okay, we all agree. Now what can we do together? And this also comes from the field of science communication, which is, like these are the questions that each of these groups is going to be asking, whether you're talking to policymakers or managers or NGOs or scientists. You're going to want to frame your message according to what it is that they're looking for, what their priorities are. All right, so I have a little activity that you all can do. It's a community poem, but before we get to that, I did want to see if there were any questions. And I'll stop share for the moment.
That was a lot of information.
It was a lot of information, I know. Yeah. Do you have questions about any of it?
Not necessarily questions. My mind is just buzzing about how I could use this and how to implement some of these things.
Okay. Yeah. And I can put my contact. I think my email is on the last slide. If anybody has any questions or want any specific resources, I'm happy to send those to you.
I'm thinking about ways to implement this with a project that I'm getting ready to push out. The state of Missouri received one of the National 4-H Preservation Project grants, and then we had another supporter kick in $25,000. And so we're going to do something massively large for a Missouri 4-H history project. And as a part of that, I want to do a virtual spin club that would go through the steps of talking about storytelling, teaching about the basics of capturing that footage with a cell phone, a tablet, whatever, how to edit that. And then their culminating event would be to create a video component of their local 4-H history that contributes to the statewide effort going into the 125th year of 4-H. So I've got lots of pieces that are swirling in my mind on how to do that now.
That's wonderful. And how do you imagine they would present that?
So part of the funds that we have secured are going to go to physically putting together some items in our newly renovated 4-H building.
Okay.
The other part of that is we're going to establish some big screen TVs.
Oh,
and we've got contacts on the team that are working with the Mizzou Library on how to catalog and capture, but we're working on having those pieces pulled in from a multitude of places across the state. So it will be almost a video archive that we're going to start creating, but not just, we need to do that, but trying to give it a way that's going to allow youth to utilize skills that appeal to them. We don't have a large, we used to have a large filmmaking festival here in Missouri. We don't have that currently. But if we're going to do a major project, capturing it from a youth perspective with a youth voice with their own skills, I think is going to be a really impactful experience for them.
It sounds like it. Yeah. And there are lots of, I think, creative ways that you could showcase that. as well. Even if certain youth wanted to do photography, for example, maybe some want to do videos, but others want to do photography. I've done a couple of digital photography exhibits that have turned out really well. So I'm happy to share resources about that as well.
Thank you.
Of course. Yeah. But yeah, congratulations to you on that project. It sounds really great.
I do, well, I hope I can do it again this year. Well, next year. But this past year, over our spring break, I did what I called a cultural connection camp for middle school and high school youth. And it was able, like, the whole point of it was to kind of just um, showcase the different cultures that we have within our community because a lot of people kind of get stuck in their bubble.
Right.
And in this particular group of youth, it was really hard to get them to share experiences and tell their stories and stuff like that. And I appreciate that these different tools
Yeah.
them to be able to do that because if I do it again, pending funding, if I can do it again for next year, I can definitely see myself utilizing some of these resources. And I've just been kind of stewing over here as well, thinking like, oh, how can I incorporate this? That's a really neat idea. So I appreciate
Yeah, of course.
the resources for sure.
Definitely. And I'm happy to share the slides with Erica too. And so she can share them with you all. Even though I know some of the slides are kind of missing context. So if you need to connect those dots, feel free to reach out. But yeah, I find that scaffolding the process is really important. Just because I think it's hard for anyone, especially anyone who's just not accustomed to sharing their story or opening up in that way or really expressing creativity can be challenging. And so giving them opportunities to get their feet wet at the beginning before jumping in can be a really effective way to get them from, thinking about it and maybe being a little unsure to actually jumping in head first. So one example is in this storytelling course that I teach at the university, there was a student who this is a course for first year students, and it's part of the honors program, so they're just randomly assigned to this class. And so a lot of people, they start on the first day and they're like, what, you're asking me to do what, and there was one student who was a chemistry major and yeah, again, just became really enamored with poetry and was very good at it. And she went from never writing a poem in her life to actually performing a poem that she wrote at the TEDx Youth event, which was really cool. And then just, making poetry and spoken word poetry just kind of a regular part of her life. So it's neat to see that transformation. Any other questions?
Another thought that I keep having is I really like the blackout poetry idea. And I'm almost thinking like we've got a staff meeting coming up where about half of our team knows each other and the other half does not.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking if I just had printouts of different pages and kind of gave them the same assignment as a way to get to know each other, I think that might be a really unique way to implement that. And I'm all about when we have our trainings as faculty and staff, I love to do things that they can then take around and use in their own form or function. So
yeah,
that would be cool.
Yeah. So you could even have a prompt. I mean, the blackout poetry can just be open-ended, or it can be something you have to create a blackout poem, but it has to be a blackout poem about yourself. I'm doing a project focused on civic engagement. Could be something similar, right? Like you have to create a poem that's related to civic engagement. And what that does too is helps young people kind of better understand, again, they're better understanding the concept of civic engagement because they're creating something that's related to it. Yeah, but that's a great idea. And it's just fun. It's a fun activity. So I'm sure your colleagues will appreciate it as well. Because, like in 4-H, we're also accustomed to, okay, another introduction, same thing, same thing. And it's just nice, for us to be able to change it up every once in a while as well. All right, so I am gonna quickly share, and I don't know that we have time to do this, but we can at least start. This is, I'm gonna put it into the chat. Okay, wait. No, let me first get the link. And this is just an example of a crowdsourced poem. If you click on that link there, and I'm going to share my screen so that you'll see what this Padlet link looks like. You can use Padlet for a number of things. One of them is to create something like a community or crowdsourced poem. And so you'll see here that I have like 3 of those sentence stems. They're all related to storytelling. So storytelling is, storytelling can, storytelling will. And I've also done something similar with youth. And I think this works well with 4-H educators. It's youth are, youth can, youth will. And I find that it's just like a nice way to end a workshop, especially a workshop that's related to storytelling. And it's yes, it's something really quick. Yeah, so if you all want to participate here, if you're unfamiliar with Padlet, there's a post little like button, I guess, on the bottom right-hand corner. You click on it, and then you can just write and then post. Yeah, you can really write up here or down here. So it's pretty easy. And you kind of see how it's coming together. One interesting thing that I did with this idea of crowdsourced poetry is for this class that I teach, I connected with, this was just happenstance, but I've done work in the past with the U.S. Embassy in Lima, and they had reached out to me because they work with a youth serving organization that was at the time raising awareness about gender-based violence. And they they had this campaign called I Te Quiero Sin Violencia, which means I love you without violence. And they wanted me to put together like some sort of message that I could share on a radio program. And I said, well, actually, can I share the message in collaboration with my students? And so students actually put together a crowdsourced poem in Spanish and English. So they wrote it in English called Love Without Violence, and then they translated it into Spanish. Then we went to the digital media lab at our university together, recorded it in Spanish and in English, and it was broadcast across 6 different radio stations in 4 different regions of Peru, which is pretty cool. So there are a lot of, I mean, there really are no limits to what you can do with this format in particular. And this is also good to do like at a staff meeting. But yeah, you can see here kind of how it's coming together. Storytelling is connecting us. Storytelling is sharing your experiences. Storytelling can help us understand each other or others' perspectives. It can empower others and help us learn from the experiences of others. Storytelling will bring people together, bring life to topics and create connections, expand our perspectives, and make the world a better place. So that's, I thought, pretty beautiful. You guys did a great job. So that is all. There are 3 minutes left. Oh, I will put this on the last page here. Let me stop share and then share. Where is it? Hold on. My apologies. Okay. I was just gonna share my name, my email address if you're interested. And then we have this website called teachingstorytelling.com. And there are resources there too that might be helpful to you. And that's all I got. We still have a couple minutes for questions if anybody has any lingering comments, questions, thoughts.
This has really been informative. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. I really appreciate it.
Uh, I co-sign with Michelle. This was very informative, very insightful. I like that it is youth focused, youth centered, giving them a voice. And that's something that we learned in our conference just a couple of days ago when we had a panel discussion with the kids and they're sharing their perspective. So this is an added resource for us to definitely implement. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. It's my pleasure. And like I said, if you all have any follow-up questions or need resources, feel free to reach out. I'm always happy to support in any way I can.
Absolutely. Well, this has been another Third Thursday Together session. Thank you all for being a part of it. And thank you again, Dr. Gonzalez, for taking time to share. We appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. Take care and enjoy the rest of your week. Bye-bye.